realized some of the mistakes that I had made on my journey, and I'm still learning, and the cannabis movement, the cannabis spirit, the cannabis plant, the cannabis community. I'm fortunate enough to be reminded of the importance of freedom and choice through it. If it had not been for its existence and prohibition, I wouldn't have spent so much time reflecting upon opportunity, freedom, and choice in all sorts of capacities, not just healthcare, not just whatever substances I want to use to balance myself out, but also in economic opportunities. And that's not something that I reflected upon until the cannabis industry, when I got involved in the market structure debate, the licensing debate. And now I'm a free market advocate.
Yeah.
More than, I did not understand the importance of freedom, of choice in regards to giving people opportunities until I saw it taken away from, the legacy people, those people that were participating in cannabis and growing and selling and doing stuff in this libertarian world in the 80s, 90s, 70s. Back with another episode of Meet Unshackled at Emerald Conference 2024 in San Diego. Beautiful day, and San Diego is not San Diego without the presence of Ken Sobel. So we're going to interview him today, and we're going to learn a little bit about his tremendous history in the cannabis industry. First of all, though, let me reintroduce the co-host that I appreciate the most. And go ahead,
George Township, Pure5 Extraction.
The extraction expert. He's very subtle. He's very quiet. But if you need to know something about extraction machines, you just contact George or John, right? George or John. We just met John. I didn't know John because I'm not an extraction guy. I tend to geek out about regulations, licensing, market structures, economics. But man, talk about a big dog being present here at Emerald, which is really cool. But another big dog who I like to see, Meet Unshackled. Yeah, Meet Unshackled, sort of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We're introducing the King Fridays or the Ken Sobels. So Ken, it's good to see you. You're one of the first people that I met on my cannabis journey.
I remember those days, and you have always been an amazing person, an inspirational person, in working as hard as you did. We all did in those days to fight and scrap to get that Arizona cannabis program going.
It was medicinal back in 2012. My first August 8, 2012 was my first cannabis gathering. And I know you guys, let's get into a little bit about who you are. And I know about your cannabis journey, but what happened before you got into medicinal cannabis in Arizona? Where'd you come from? How'd you end up there?
So here in California, where I was living at the time, in San Diego, where I'm living now, of course, but in that period of time, around 2001, 2002, we had already had a medical cannabis program in California since 1996. However, the whole rollout of that program was delayed by the case involving the drug czar. Within a month after the voters in California voted for Prop 215, had declared that any physician who gave a recommendation would lose their DEA prescription writing privileges.
That was Bill Clinton's drug czar.
And that was Bill Clinton's drug czar of all people. But that case went on for almost 4 or 5 years before it finally ended up with the plaintiffs in that case, a collection of doctors and patients, actually winning, and it being held that they have a First Amendment right to recommend cannabis. So the program in California really didn't get going till about then. And right about the same time, I was taking care of my mother-in-law, who was terminal with cancer, and came home with all the drugs and the opioids and the other things that the doctors frequently prescribed for that, only to find that she was in an almost catatonic condition, unhappy as hell. And so somebody elbowed me and said, "You've got to have her try cannabis for cancer." And so we got her going with that, and just complete night and day change, like I said, basically unable to communicate or respond or be happy. All of a sudden she's chatty, she's happy, she's eating, And even though it's terminal cancer and she would eventually pass within about 6 months, she
And
was happy.
And this 2001,
That was
2002.
about 2001.
And were you a cannabis advocate, cannabis consumer, cannabis at that point? Were in your life, Western medicine, Eastern medicine? What was your perspective at that time?
Yeah, my perspective at that time was basically that it's an illegal drug, and so it's to be avoided. Although my spouses in those earlier days, they were frequent users.
Right.
Of
So
cannabis,
this was like an aha moment for you.
Aha moment for sure.
Because we all had to go through that aha moment, you
Yeah.
know, and except for some of the guys who've been like my Uncle Mike, since he's been using since 1966 every day,
Right.
still to this day.
Right.
There was no aha moment. He was a therapeutic cannabis user. This stuff is great. It's God's gift to everybody.
Absolutely.
All that time. But they really did a number of on us in the 80s and taught us all that it was like the devil's weed.
Of course.
You know,
so
it's just,
we have all that propaganda to sort of going uphill against.
I was a victim of that propaganda.
Right.
And so in 2001, 2002, you kind of had that aha moment. Then what happened?
Then I began helping other people getting into that, beginning part of the industry here in California, opening collectives, which were the same as the retail dispensaries, getting cultivation things going. And all of that was pretty much still illegal from a planning and zoning aspect.
Yep.
But we were doing it, and so I assisted others in doing that and helped them get started. Had a couple of operations that I was involved in directly. And, it just continued that education process and realizing that this is something that's beneficial to all human beings, because all human beings have an endocannabinoid system. So as we learned about that more, it reinforced, our desire to make it more readily, legally available to people.
So you were in the San Diego, California area, 2001, 2009. How did you migrate over to Arizona?
So, well, the first one was that back in 1980, for the first and only time, as it turned out, you could actually, in the summer of 1980, take both the California and Arizona bar exams in the same week.
Okay.
So California had started on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was multi-state day, and Thursday and Friday, Arizona started Wednesday, multi-state day, and essays Thursday and Friday. So I actually found out about it, hadn't studied. I was studying California law mostly. But I flew over from California Wednesday evening and sat down for the Arizona bar exam Thursday morning.
Smarty pants.
And happened to pass both of them on my first try.
Nice.
So I literally was sworn in early October in Arizona and had to wait till December for California, because bigger state, more people taking the test and all those things. But so I still maintained a lot of connections and contacts in Arizona. And when obviously the AMA vote was up in November of 2010, I'd come back to advocate for that passage.
Yep.
And sat there and watched the results, with basically winning it by 5,000 votes. Thank you, Tucson, Arizona, Pima County.
Yeah.
Because literally it doesn't exist without Pima County. And then thereafter, just organized, met people, inspirational people like you, Dimitri.
Well, I'll be honest.
A small circle.
When we
of
first
people.
met, Ken, 2011, I think it was the council office, and you guys are coming through, all these activists who I now understand were all the good, honest people that weren't bitten by the propaganda that I was. Well, I guess you were at a certain point too, but we all have to have an awakening.
Right.
And I was sitting there with chiefs of police and city attorneys and council members, and we're pulling ordinances and ideas out of thin air about how many plants should be in a cultivation, local ordinances in 2011, trying to planning and zoning all these themes and all these ideas. There was this danger, this dispensary, so we have to have this distance and stuff. It was the greatest example of the absurdity of government.
Oh, yeah.
That I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
I thought we were doing the right things. I was looking at all these guys like, well, these hippies, like my uncle found a politically viable way to get high. That's what we were all thinking. All the fuddy-duddies, even the moderates, even the people, the lawyers and stuff, the prosecutors, the city attorneys, the council people, the Democrats and Republicans, all of us were of that mindset as you guys are coming through trying to logically explain things as they should be.
Right.
And 2012, my brother got a license. I know you got a license too.
Yeah.
And and I was done working in government, and so I said, this seems interesting. It seems like a big societal shift. A lot of themes here, a lot of economics, substance use, substance abuse, medicinal stuff. And I asked him what I could do for him, and so he said, "Come in, study what's going on, help me out, network. Let's figure this out together." And 3 years, I figured it out. I figured out that you were the good guys, and we were just jerks in 2011, and I mean, it's just unbelievable the change that I went through coming to understand it. Naturopathic medicine, Eastern medicine, herbal remedies. Marijuana is a therapeutic drug. Marijuana is less harmful than alcohol in so many capacities, which is something that I was ingrained to think.
Yeah.
And it just, we were so brainwashed. So I appreciate you and appreciate what you did. I just thought a little bit of reflection here because we haven't seen each other for a while in 2011, but 2012, back to you. Sorry. You went into, you did some different projects in Arizona.
Yes. And so we were just able to begin operations. So recall that the governor had basically said, we're not going to implement the AMA, even though the voters had voted for it. But we basically in Arizona fought an uphill battle and amazingly won, thanks to Dimitri and our other small group at that point of people fighting constantly. We must have won half a dozen or more lawsuits to basically get the program open.
I was involved in that after August 8th, 2012, I was full-time in.
Yeah.
And I wasn't as zealous as I was because I was trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
But then in 2013, I realized what this industry was about, what this community was about, what this plant was about. So it's 2013, the lawsuits, but go ahead.
And the funny thing is, as a friend of mine at the time was involved either with the House of Representatives in Arizona or later the Senate. And he was a fraternity brother, and I ran into him early on in the phase, right after we convinced the legislature in Arizona not to try to overrule or weaken AMA. But years later, I ran into him like 2 years ago, and he goes, "Sobel, I guess you were right."
Yeah. Remember we had Ethan Nadelman, Jeff Dial, we had a bunch of these guys. We were all right there.
Yeah.
And I used all my fuddy-duddy contacts, to help. I'm like, these guys are, once I understood that you guys were the ones telling the truth and had the good public policy, and I was like, okay, so I used my resources as best I could.
And part of it was just, like common sense. Like, California had passed it in a voter initiative at about 57% approval back in 96. And, here we are in 2010 or a little later, and it hadn't fallen into the ocean. Intense crime waves didn't break out. All of the objections that were always made to it were pretty much, but it's been 15 years. It's, there's very few adverse. In fact, we found in Arizona that within a year of implementation, that actually teen use of cannabis dropped after legalization.
Yeah, because it's no longer the rebel thing to do.
That's right.
Those
of us who are parents, we know that the easiest way to get your kids not to do something is to say it's okay to do it.
Not so fun anymore.
You take away that negative from it, and they basically don't want to, mess with it.
So you did your projects in Arizona. I remember you involved in a bunch of projects. Anyone that you want to talk about, or should we move into how you came back to San Diego?
Yeah, no, I worked with a bunch of people, in the area, many of whom are still operating. And
many of whom were crooks too. But you don't have to say anything.
Well, I wouldn't, because don't. I always say that
there's so many of them.
What's worse? I mean, people using cannabis or prohibition. And by far, the greatest social ill is prohibition, which stigmatized a lot of people, prevented them from getting jobs, sent them to jail to do some hard time. I mean, so there's no real comparison. I mean, those of us who have advocated for cannabis, especially on the medicinal side, we know that we're on the right side of history. That's where we are. But I've always said that, all cannabis is medical cannabis, and everyone who uses cannabis uses it for a medical reason, whether they know it or not.
Therapeutic. Yeah. Even therapy. I always say all cannabis use is therapeutic use.
Yeah.
And the goal is, if you really want to work on yourself, try to figure out if you can fix, heal, or eliminate the need for coffee in the morning, why don't I try to develop habits that give me a better
Yeah.
night's sleep?
Yeah.
So I don't need to sharpen myself with coffee. So I feel the way that I should, but I'm not sleeping well at night because of my habits. And the same
Yeah.
thing, so I see cannabis exactly like I see coffee now, as something that people use to balance themselves
Yeah.
out.
Except less addictive.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But years later, I had the famous confrontation with Will Humble in the Arizona Department of Health Services when we petitioned to add post-traumatic stress disorder added to the qualifying conditions. And the long story short is that eventually we won after a 4.5-day evidentiary trial in Arizona. And actually, to this day, PTSD is the only additional new qualified that was added by the petition process. But years later, I would run into Will Humble, who would say, the former director of the Arizona Department of Health Services, and really more of a hero than a goat, because he really did fight the powerhouse right wing to make sure we had a program.
He did.
But he would later say to me, he goes, you were right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all go. I mean, the propaganda behind this plan was incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. So how did you end up? You came back to San Diego and.
So we came back in 2015. So about a year after we won our case for PTSD in Arizona and had that added as a condition. And so we relocated back to California. California 2015 added the statewide medical program. Before then, it had all been a series of local collectives without really state regulation. And so we came back to help pass that through the legislature. That was the medical part of the act.
Right.
And then, of course, a couple of years later, we would end up passing Prop 64, which was the adult legalization in California.
And have you been in, I think you said you're working on a dispensary. What were you? Have you been involved in the projects here? Or?
Yeah, I'm still involved with people locally and helping, assisting, getting licenses. I have a few operations of my own, doing work in all different parts of the state. And I do a lot of policy advocating. We actually passed a bill that I wrote for the legislature. It's called Ryan's Law. And Ryan was a young man who unfortunately got pancreatic cancer and died at the age of 40. His dad was a very helpful person that I worked with in planning and zoning issues around cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan, when he was stricken with pancreatic cancer, they put him on heavy doses of opioids. And again, almost repeating the scenario that got me into this industry, he was unable to find a hospital that would allow him to use cannabis in the hospital. So it took a couple of weeks before he found a hospital that let him use cannabis products. Nurse Heather, my spouse,
Yes.
Created some
At this
extracts.
point, Ken is better known to be the spouse of Nurse Heather.
She's my better 2/3 for sure.
Google Nurse Heather.
And anyway, we finally found the hospital, and as soon as they could administer the extract that Nurse Heather provided, within 8 to 10 hours, he was chatting, he was comfortable, he was pain-free, he could be with his family. Unfortunately, he passed about 3 weeks after that. So he lost at least 2 weeks of being able to be communicative with his family. So we created, and I wrote Ryan's Law. And so it was finally passed unanimously in California.
It's pretty good.
Every single vote in the Assembly, every single vote in the Senate, most conservative Republicans to the most progressive Democrats. And it finally got to the governor's desk, and he signed it. But Ryan's Law now provides that a person who's declared to be terminally ill is allowed to use cannabis in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
No ifs, ands, or buts. And so we've got that in California, and hoping to got working with some folks in Arizona now, and I plan on getting in touch with you. But
I'll help out.
we want to get Ryan's Law passed in other states because it's a compassionate access.
Yeah. We could probably throw that onto a bill that's cruising through the House and Senate right now in Arizona, actually.
Yeah. I'll get you some information.
You'll
I
chat about
apologize for not reaching out before.
No. I don't get involved that much and stuff. Now, I realize some of the mistakes that I made on my journey, and I'm still learning. And the cannabis movement, the cannabis spirit, the cannabis plant, the cannabis community. I'm fortunate enough to be reminded of the importance of freedom and choice through it. If it had not been for its existence and prohibition, I wouldn't have spent so much time reflecting upon opportunity, freedom, and choice in all sorts of capacities, not just healthcare, not just whatever substances I want to use to balance myself out, but also in economic
Right.
opportunities. And that's not something that I reflected upon until the cannabis industry when I got involved in the market structure debate,
Right.
the licensing debate, and now I mean, I'm a free market advocate
Yeah.
more than.
Yeah.
I mean, I did not understand the importance of freedom,
Yeah.
of choice in regards to giving people opportunities until I saw it taken away from the OG, the legacy people, those people that were
Yeah.
participating in cannabis and growing and selling and doing stuff in this libertarian world in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 2000s. Then now this new licensing structure, it exists both out of necessity, but also because the cannabis industry created it.
Right.
You know, but the cannabis industry didn't know what it was doing and didn't know the monster that it was creating that's been taken advantage of by lobbyists and certain special interests. And so I am now an
Yeah.
unapologetic advocate of the free market approach to cannabis because uh, that has awakened the spirit of freedom within me.
Yeah.
And I'm forever grateful to the cannabis movement for bringing that to my attention because there's few things more important in the development of human history than free will and freedom.
Yeah.
And to be able to reflect on it and touch it in your life and see it as a
Yeah.
valuable thing. And you could go through your life as a construction worker and not think about freedom too much except for an American flag or a propaganda
Yeah.
on the right or the left, just some little theme, maybe while you salute or
Okay.
do the Pledge of Allegiance. But
Exactly.
you
We
know,
had one Republican senator said, "I have never voted for a cannabis bill. I will never ever again vote for another one, but I am voting for Ryan's Law because
Yeah.
that's about human dignity. It's about human freedom, and it's a strong and compelling message." So
and I don't think the author, I'm sorry, George, you want to say something, but I don't think the author of Dune was intentionally doing this. But when he talked about Muad'Dib, when he talked about the Freeman, and when he talked about the spice, and when he talked about the freedom fighters, that's what I have found in the cannabis movement. And every time I meet one of the OGs like yourself, Ethan Nadelman, Steve Fox, he's gone now, Rob Campia, all these individuals out there, Chris Crane, all there's hundreds and thousands throughout the world. Those are just some of the ones that I know that were involved in this. I'm saying you guys are the freemen from Dune.
right.
You guys are the ones who understood the importance of the spice belongs to the people,
Yeah.
and you were
Yeah.
out there advocating. And it took me a while to catch up because I was Nancy Reagan.
Yeah. Yeah.
That should be a verb.
And it's one small step in this little corner of where we are, but it is so important for our human, enjoyment. I mean, part of the, it's the Constitution is basically to, live a happy life, among
Yeah.
other things. But I think that in Ryan's Law, what it represents beyond just these terminally ill patients being accessing using cannabis in a hospital, but it's a step closer to bridging this big divide between the medical industrial complex, if you will,
Yeah.
and cannabis. And so, actually, last month, I directed the grand rounds for the largest health insurance company in Connecticut. And so these are all important steps. We haven't stopped. We keep moving forward because all of these things lead to a better outcome and an integration of both medicine as it's practiced in the allopathic way, as well as plant medicine.
Absolutely. And, you know, Ken, your guiding principles I think are the same as mine. So we're going to keep on fighting for the right things, and I'll help you out whatever I can do in Arizona on this. But how do people best get in touch with you?
Easy enough because they can find me, on Facebook, or they can find me on some of those,
LinkedIn? Are you on
things.
LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm at Kenny SoCal 711 at gmail.com. Kenny SoCal 711. Phone number 619-208-2439.
I always give out my cell phone 520-909-4334.
Why not, man? I'm reaching an age where I like talking to people because I don't have that much time left to keep talking to people. So take advantage of it all.
When you ain't got I like, it's not, I haven't made a saying, but you feel like I'm not hiding anything, and I just want to share the truth that I know. hear the truth that you have and figure out what the real truth is together.
Yes,
So,
and
I
we're
just made that
moving
up.
moving into the psychedelic space as well. So there's
Yes.
a lot of opportunities there. And we have some local products that are really outstanding. If you like, I'll bring some for you later this afternoon.
Well, we're gonna chat the rest of this time at the Emerald Conference 2024, San Diego, California. This has been another episode of Meat Unshackled. Thank you, Ken, for joining us. I've learned some things I didn't know about you, and of course, I admire your work for all these years. So we look forward to doing more things together. We're young.
Yep, mighty mighty. Thanks so much for bringing this to life.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Ken. This has been another episode of Meat Unshackled.